Trump's campaign continues to drop some of the most brutal takedowns of Kamala Harris you'll ever see. Each ad peels back the layers of her nonsensical rhetoric, exposing her weaknesses for everyone to see. And once again, Trump's team doesn't hold back. It's savage, relentless, and exactly what we've come to expect. This is part 2 of our top 5 most brutal Trump ads that destroyed Kamala Harris. We're breaking down even more moments where the leftists' hypocrisy, political correctness, and wokeism all get torn apart. Let's get right into it. Number 5. Meet Kamala Harris. The first ad on this list practically writes itself because Kamala Harris seems determined to give us all the material we need. From her shaky response to being called the most liberal senator to the endless giggling, she knows how extreme she is but just doesn't care. The funniest part? It's like she's proud of being a political laughingstock. You watch her get called out for these radical positions, and instead of owning it or explaining herself, she laughs like we're all in on some kind of joke. Now let's dive into her immigration stance. Kamala says she doesn't want to treat people crossing the border illegally as criminals. So why don't we just forget about borders entirely, right? Because why even have them if illegal crossings aren't considered a crime? She then says she's fine with abolishing ICE, the agency responsible for keeping dangerous criminals out of the country. This isn't just a bad take, it's dangerous. If you're in favor of abolishing ICE and treating border crossings like a walk in the park, then who's protecting American citizens from human traffickers, drug smugglers, and other criminals slipping through? Kamala wants to hand out universal health care to illegal immigrants too, all while citizens are struggling to afford their own insurance premiums. She's fine with using taxpayer dollars to fund Medicare for people who broke the law to enter the country, but she doesn't plan to lower healthcare costs for actual citizens. She's basically telling everyone to foot the bill for people who didn't follow the rules, all while our own healthcare system crumbles. Oh, and let's talk about her stance on public safety. Kamala thinks adding more police officers to the streets doesn't create more safety. Really? Because last time I checked, cities with defunded police departments saw skyrocketing crime rates. We all know that less police presence equals more chaos. And her brilliant solution? Get rid of money bail and allow violent criminals to walk free while awaiting trial. And don't even get me started on the economy. She's all in on Medicare for all, which sounds great until you realize it comes with a price tag of trillions of dollars in inflationary spending. That's right, Kamala's job-killing policies, like banning fracking, would wreck entire industries, while her Green New Deal and Medicare for all would drive taxes through the roof. And let's not forget that banning plastic straws is somehow part of her grand plan to save the planet. Because clearly, plastic straws are public enemy number 1 in Kamala's world.
Kamala Harris, my pronouns are she and her.
You're considered the most liberal United States senator. Well, actually, the nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
We are going to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
I am in favor of saying that we're not going to treat people who are undocumented and cross borders criminals. That's correct. That is correct.
A lot of the signs at the rally you just held were people standing there saying, abolish ICE.
Yeah.
Is that a position that you agree with?
We need to probably think about starting from scratch.
So you support giving universal health care, Medicare for all to people who are in this country illegally?
I am opposed to any policy that would deny in our country any human being public health, period.
Are you for defunding the police?
How are you defining defund the police? It's actually wrong and backward to think that more police officers will create more safety. We need to get rid of money bail.
Convicted, in prison, like the Boston Marathon bomber, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation.
I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. I have always supported Medicare for all. I was very happy to sign on to Bernie's bill, and I give Bernie, frankly, a lot of credit. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should.
Number 4. Pro-criminal extremist. The next ad talks about how Kamala Harris promoted a bail fund during the violent 2020 protests in Minnesota, all while criminals, murderers, rapists, and violent offenders are walking free because of her actions. This ad exposes her virtue signaling for what it really is: recklessness that literally puts dangerous criminals back on the streets. Kamala told her supporters to chip in for these so-called protesters, and what do we get? Convicted murderers and rapists who go right back to committing crimes. It's hard to watch without shaking your head in disbelief. Let's break it down. Kamala Harris promoted the Minnesota Freedom Fund, or MFF, to raise money to bail out protesters. What actually happened is that dangerous people were able to post bail thanks to her support, like Darnica Floyd, for example. She was charged with second-degree murder. This lady stabbed a friend to death, but hey, the MFF thought she deserved to be back on the streets. Then there's Christopher Boswell, a convicted rapist with charges of kidnapping and assault. His bail was a whopping $350,000, but thanks to Kamala's fundraising efforts, he walked out too. So much for keeping communities safe. This lady doesn't even seem to realize the chaos she unleashed. She put out a tweet, raised $35 million, and then sat back while the money was used to bail out some of the worst criminals in the system. That's not all. This evil fundraiser directly enabled criminals like Sean Michael Tillman, who shot and killed a man on a train platform just weeks after being released. It also empowered Donovan Boone, who broke into his ex-girlfriend's home, choked her, and then disappeared after being bailed out by this Kamala Harris-sponsored Minnesota Freedom Fund. Next is Thomas Mosley, who was bailed out by MFF multiple times. This guy was involved in damaging a police precinct, rioting, and, oh yeah, trying to illegally buy a gun while in possession of drugs like cocaine and mushrooms. And yet, thanks to Kamala's favorite bail fund, Mosley kept getting released. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. For criminals, that is. And of course, we can't forget Lionel Malachi Timms, who was bailed out by MFF only to brutally assault someone just 11 days later. Or George Howard, who was charged with second-degree murder after being bailed out. Kamala, these aren't protesters you're helping. These are dangerous criminals, and your tweet made it possible for them to walk free. And here's the kicker. MFF didn't even care about the specifics of the charges. A representative for the fund, Greg Lewin, openly admitted, "I often don't even look at the charge specifics when I bail someone out." So Kamala was out here telling people to fund a system that doesn't even bother checking if someone is a violent offender or not. The result? A revolving door of criminals going in and out of jail.
Sending this out on X. If you're able to chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota.
Thanks to Harris's promotion, the group reportedly raised $35 million in just a few weeks.
Darnica Floyd, charged with second-degree murder for stabbing a friend to death, and she got out of jail too. A twice-convicted rapist, currently charged with kidnapping and sexual assault, and he walks out too.
The Freedom Fund raked in donations when it was promoted by many, including now Vice President Kamala Harris.
Sean Michael Tillman shot and killed a passenger on a train platform after reportedly being released from jail 3 weeks prior. All thanks to the Minnesota Freedom Fund.
Donovan Boone was charged with breaking into the home of an ex-girlfriend and choking her. Freedom Fund bailed him out for $3,000 cash, and he hasn't shown up for court since.
I often don't even look at a charge specifics when I bail someone out.
The Hennepin County attorney called out the Minnesota Freedom Fund for bailing Mosley out of jail twice previously, even though he was arrested for having a gun in the courthouse.
The Minnesota Freedom Fund, which pays cash bail for low-income criminals, paid Timms's entire $10,000 bail in cash.
11 days later, police found a man bleeding from the head and ears in this alley. Police were able to arrest Timms in connection to this violent assault.
Howard was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The Minnesota Freedom Fund acknowledged supporting Howard's bail.
Number 3. Inflation crisis. Kamala does most of the work herself in this ad. She's proudly casting the tie-breaking vote for the American Rescue Plan, a piece of legislation that, as even Obama's economists point out, directly contributed to today's inflation crisis. Kamala grins like she's just solved all of America's problems, while in reality, people can't even afford groceries or gas. It's almost surreal how out of touch she looks. Let's talk facts. The American Rescue Plan was a $1.9 trillion spending spree that was supposed to help Americans recover from the pandemic. Instead, it flooded the economy with money, driving up demand while supply chains were still struggling. The result? Skyrocketing inflation. Kamala Harris is an idiot. She doesn't have a damn clue about inflation. Jason Furman, Obama's former top economist, and Larry Summers, Clinton's former Treasury Secretary, both warned that the plan was too big and would lead to economic disaster. And guess who cast the deciding vote? Yep, Kamala Harris. Inflation is hitting Americans where it hurts the most: food, rent, and gas. People are literally standing in food lines because they can't keep up with the rising costs. Meanwhile, Kamala is cheerleading for the disaster known as Bidenomics, like it's some sort of genius economic plan. All this clown did was throw $2 trillion at an already fragile economy and hope for the best. The best, as it turns out, hasn't happened. What did happen? Inflation shot up and Americans are paying the price every day at the pump and in the grocery store aisles. Even Janet Yellen couldn't deny it. The American Rescue Plan boosted demand, and that demand is a big factor in today's inflation. Of course, she tried to downplay it, but the damage is done. And while they're busy patting themselves on the back, 15,000 people in Beaufort County alone are food insecure.
The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the concurrent resolution as amended is adopted.
She cast the deciding vote to pass the American Rescue Plan, which pushed inflation, supporting all the spending that President Biden signed into law, and people are still struggling to pay bills.
Even some former Obama economists had said the American Rescue Plan has contributed to the inflation that we're seeing today.
It's definitely too big for the moment. I don't know any economist that was recommending something the size that what was done.
The tremendous wall of money just sets off a dynamic. And then the thing about inflation is you start chasing your tail.
Did it create inflation? Did $2 trillion of deficit spending create inflation?
It did boost demand, and that is one of several factors that are involved in inflation.
There are 15,000 people in Beaufort County who are food insecure, and the line of people in need seems to be growing.
Higher gas prices and rent also helped push inflation up.
Economic indicators point to extreme pain.
The Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the concurrent resolution as amended is adopted.
All of this is part of our blueprint together for what America can be. This is Bidenomics.
Number 2, border czar. When Kamala was put in charge of the border, she pretended like everything was fine. First, she ignored it, dodging questions with that classic non-answer, "at some point." Then she did what she does best: lie. The border is secure, she says, while breaking news headlines scream about record migrant surges and out-of-control crime. The humor here isn't just in Kamala's blatant dishonesty, it's in how completely out of touch she is, like she's living in an alternate reality where facts don't matter. The ad cuts through the BS with precision. Biden handed her the reins to fix the immigration crisis, and what did she do? Nothing. While the border was crumbling under record illegal crossings, Kamala was busy dodging the situation. The problem now is there's a record-breaking migrant surge. Kamala really thinks people would buy this. The border is a mess. Record illegal immigration, migrant crime spiking, and fentanyl flowing into the country like water. Yet she has the nerve to tell Americans the border is secure. Secure for who? Because it sure isn't secure for the American families dealing with the fallout of your inaction. 10 million illegal immigrants later, and you're still out here claiming victory. And that laugh. Every time Kamala is confronted with the reality of her failures, she giggles like it's no big deal. It's almost as if she doesn't realize the seriousness of the situation. Or worse, she just doesn't care. Oh, and let's not forget that fentanyl is killing thousands of Americans every year, much of it coming across that same secure border. Kamala, where's the accountability? People are dying from fentanyl overdose, and you have done nothing to stop the flow of these deadly substances into our country. If she calls that a secure border, I'd hate to see what she thinks a crisis looks like. Then Trump comes in at the end with the perfect punchline, "I'm Donald J. Trump and I approve this message." Pure comedy gold.
Joe Biden made Kamala Harris border czar to fix immigration. First, she ignored it.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point.
Then she just lied.
The border is secure.
10 million illegal immigrants. Migrant crime out of control. Fentanyl kills thousands.
We have a secure border.
Kamala Harris, failed, weak, dangerously liberal.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Number 1. I don't understand. This last ad shows Kamala Harris grinning while dancing at a party, but it immediately hits her with some hard-hitting facts. She's the so-called border czar, and yet while she's out partying, over 10 million illegal immigrants have crossed the border under her watch. The contrast between her carefree attitude and the grim statistics that follow is brutal. The human toll: 250,000 dead from fentanyl, migrant crimes on the rise, and even the threat of ISIS now making its way into the U.S. The ad paints a clear picture of incompetence, and Kamala is completely oblivious to it all. This lady is supposed to handle the border crisis, but all we've seen are record-breaking failures. Migrant crime is spiking, with stories like the brutal murder of a Georgia student making headlines. And let's not forget the resurgence of ISIS. A threat most Americans thought was contained is now back, thanks in part to Kamala's weak border policies. Yet what do we see? Kamala shaking it like everything's just peachy. And then there's that now infamous line, "I haven't been to Europe." Yeah, like the border is in Europe. The fact that she deflected a serious question with that nonsensical reply shows just how carefree she is about this crisis. Trump's team ends the ad on a powerful note. Kamala really is failed, weak, and dangerously liberal. It's hard to argue with that. When you're the border czar and your biggest accomplishment is attending parties while the country deals with the fallout of your disastrous policies, you shouldn't even think of running for the highest office in the land.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here. 250,000 Americans dead from fentanyl. Brutal migrant crimes. And ISIS now here.
Do you have any plans to visit the border? You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making.
Kamala Harris, failed, weak, dangerously liberal.
And that's it for this video. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on which of Kamala's failures stands out the most. Don't forget to like, share this video with your family and friends to help spread the word, and if you haven't already, subscribe and click that bell icon so you don't miss a single takedown. Thanks for watching.